Hello, everyone. Just one moment while we get our speaker on the platform. Hello, Daniel.
Hello.
I just want to let you know that you are not currently sharing your screen.
Yep, just fixed that.
Okay, there we go. It just came up. Perfect. Thank you so much.
And you're still seeing the screen now, right?
Yes, I still see it. I see your screen in presentation mode, and I see you. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this wonderful Friday. We really appreciate you taking the time. Today we have Daniel Scheifler with us. He is one of our greatest speakers here at Improving. Today, he will be talking to us about personal knowledge management, the force multiplier for knowledge workers. He really has some great content for us. I think we'll all learn a lot today. For our viewers, if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. And if you would like, I will also start enabling the chat feature, which you are more than welcome to connect with us there as well. Other than that, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. Take it away.
All righty. Thank you, Jordan. Welcome, everyone, to Personal Knowledge Management. Today, I'm going to try and do something a little different. One of the things I've noticed that's come up a lot of times in talks is that you can get the sage on the stage syndrome, where it's just me projecting what I think you need to know. But as the title suggests, this is intended to be personal. So I would encourage you at any time during this presentation, please throw a question up there. Jordan has volunteered to help me out here to make certain we can ask and answer those questions as they come up. So as you go through that, I'd like to start with, what stuff are you thinking about based upon the title, based upon the blurb, you really want to take away from this talk? And I'll see if I can do my best to make certain you get that out of this talk. Jordan, I'm going to ask, we've got some people coming in, but do we have any questions that have come in already based upon the title?
Yeah, Daniel, we actually have someone commented. They're not really sure what personal knowledge management is exactly. Is that something you could dig into a little bit?
Sure. So one of the kind of things that'll come up when we ask, so what do you mean by personal knowledge management? Do you mean learning new skills, like maybe attending talks, or are you talking more about like getting organized with what you're doing and the habits and getting involved with, user groups and communities like that? Those are all good thoughts. But when I think personal knowledge management, I have to break the word down. Obviously, I broke down the personal part. It's about you and your patterns, your habits. So definitely start with the internal side here. But the thing that you're managing is the operative word, knowledge. Now, of course, we've got an entire study in philosophy called epistemology trying to figure out what this thing, knowledge, is. And I'll let you go off and explore that on your own. But when we talk about knowledge, I want to talk and focus primarily on the products of the knowledge worker, ideas, processes, concepts that you use and operate in your daily work or in the creation of your craft. Now, when we talk management, of course, we can always think of, oh, well, it's like a management of a business. Yeah, there's some of that. How you get new stock in, how you put stock out. Those are important aspects. But I want to think of it more in terms of maybe logistics. What's the rate you're getting stuff in? How are you making certain that's ending up in the right buckets? How are you making certain to make good use of those things as you develop it? And of course, with the personal aspect, this is all about your stuff, not necessarily about your organization. And there's an entire category of knowledge around organizational knowledge management. But right now, I want to talk today about personal, about how the stuff in your head is operating, how you're cultivating and growing your knowledge, and how you're making best use of it and applying it. Hopefully that gets you a good place to start. Any others?
That does. That was really helpful. We did have one come in. And it might be a little bit of a jump ahead.
Okay.
But will there be any mention of the Zettel-Kasten method?
Someone did their homework.
Watch that a little bit.
So the short answer is yes. In fact, you're a little bit ahead, which is fantastic. My goal in this talk is actually to explore that framework a little bit as a tool for exploring what makes for effective knowledge management. But let me sweeten the pot a little bit, right? Today, I want you guys to meet Niklas Luman. He was a prolific German sociologist. In fact, I'm going to make the statement that he changed the face of sociology fundamentally in the 20th century. In his 70 years, which ended sadly in 1998, he managed to produce 70 books, 70 books, one book for every year the man was alive. And it didn't start until after he was 17 and had gone to college for this. He published 400 scholarly articles. And I don't know if you guys recognize, but scholarly articles, we mean like the stuff that gets published in journals. And this was before the advent of the internet. So the man was doing a hefty amount of writing for the advent of the personal computer, which came about after World War II, which was, of course, during the time when he was in college, he had to be doing this. So this is probably like with typewriters. And of course, as I already mentioned, he changed the field of sociology. And when I say he did that, I mean that he contributed theories that gave sociology new tools to explain the impact of one individual on the shape of society, as well as how society could end up providing background context for that individual. He's most well known for a systems thinking. The man thought in systems. And my gosh, if you study some of his work, the systems thinking kind of is this catch-all that helps us explain both how we got there and the kind of things that end up changing the paths we can take. But of course, with all of this, the very natural question is, how in blazes did he do this? He didn't have a computer. He didn't have an electronic filing system. He had to do this some other way, probably pretty labor intensive, I would imagine. Well, yeah, kind of. But he did it with these. These are index cards, right? Little 3x5 paper slips. And that man, through his personal practice of knowledge management, converted those little slips into brand new social system thinking. He transformed those little slips into his powerful research tool, which has become known as the Zettelkasten, or the slip box system. Now, in saying all of that, the man had found some way to take notes and convert them into 3x5. Like when I take notes, I have reams and reams of paper full of things. I have gone through these things and I'm like, okay, so now how am I going to condense all of that onto a 3x5? And what do I condense there? The man's system not only allowed him to find the good things to condense like that, but allowed him to find the content and extend on it over time. Now, I think I see a couple of things coming in here in chat. Let's see what we got.
Oh, sorry about that. Daniel. That was me just talking to our attendees today.
No problem, no problem.
Nothing. We do have one question coming up.
What's that?
If you would like to finish your thought, or we can jump right in.
Let's jump right in.
Yeah, sure. So we do have a question. The person, just like myself, is a very bad note taker. They struggle a lot getting like key points down and things like that. Do you have any suggestions or tips that might help them in that area?
Yes, actually, I've got a couple. One of the things that made the difference for me, both professionally and honestly in education, was a teacher I had in middle school. I believe her name was Miss Perrin, social studies. She took the first day of her class that school year and taught every one of her students a note-taking method and insisted we would follow it for the notes in her class. I think it was one of the named note-taking methods, but cannot for the life of me remember it because over the years, I've taken that note-taking method as a basis and mutated it to suit my needs. And here's generally what that looks like. Take your piece of paper, and the first thing you need to recognize when you're taking your notes is just take notes. Don't edit, don't worry about trying to capture the grand themes. The best thing to do is to capture your thoughts in associations that allow you to connect them later. Start with borrowing the headings, for example. You're reading a book and like you get this new heading about some new biological system. Okay, new heading. And then you can take basically just bullet pointed notes of the things that come up as important. This might be the formulas that they're using to determine the burn rate of sugar in some solution. Or it might be the patterns that deal with the evolution, the things that impact it. Lists sometimes end up appearing on these. But the trick is to capture those things which flash in your mind as, oh, right, I should try and remember this, or this seems to be important. Don't worry about filtering it yet, because very oftentimes when you're doing this, you don't know what's important yet, and that's okay. You don't have to. But separating that step is one of the most important pieces I've found. Grab the headings from the content you're already there with, capture basically as much as you can of the stuff that seems important, and over time, your practice will get better. You'll know the things that are actually important to come through. But most importantly, don't let your note-taking stop there. One of the most powerful techniques I developed in college for making use of these notes was what I described as a condensing review. I would, have a test, right? So engineering, I'm studying this particular formula for interpreting signals on a wire. Okay, cool. I have 40 different formulas to memorize and a bunch of different patterns I need to recognize and understand for those that went up across, some, let's call it 40 pages of notes, having been taken over the first few weeks or a month of the semester. What am I going to do with that? Certainly can't bring that as a crib sheet to my exam. My professors did me the great kindness of saying you may have a one sheet page front and back as your crib sheet. Okay, cool, I've got a destination. I would start by taking all of those notes and I would create a new sheet of paper, the condensed review of all of these that I would take from those things and remember, what did I have trouble with? What really made the impact? Because maybe this variation of the formula is like more setting up to derive the real one later. Cool, I don't need that one then. I need this one down at the end about how I really used it. Building up the understanding of both how you organize your information and then how to condense it to the stuff that really is impactful for you. It basically takes, I've already had the information, and then I have a goal. Where do I want to end up with it? And those two steps, take all the notes you can, and then go back and condense them to get the really important stuff, essentially sift through it, is the two steps that I recommend to become a better note taker, because you can't do it all in one step. And if you try and think of all of the editing and filtering at the same time you're trying to capture, you're not going to get done. Great question, though. We got any others, or shall I proceed?
No, please proceed. That was really incredible. That was really helpful, even for myself. I know I have a lot of areas in between, so I'm gonna go and start practicing some of those.
Awesome.
But yeah, please continue. Thank you.
So one of the critical aspects I just highlighted there is that these slips, right? These are just paper slips. There's nothing magical about them. And a lot of the work that Nicholas Luman did was by hand. But he focused, in my opinion, on really 4 key characteristics that these slips are supposed to enable. The first one, he focused on being able to easily catch the ideas that were floating through his head. Normally, he would do this more or less on one per slip. We'll get to how he figured out which ones go on which slips and how he related them later. Because the next important thing was that the slips allowed him a standard format for organization, and in particular, storage. He had the ability to easily store them. Like there was already an existing little box he could stick slips in, sort of like you do with the Dewey Decimal System back in old paper and pen libraries rather than the electronic system. He could store it so he could protect them. He could gather them all up. He could move them if he had to. But more critically, he had to design systems that allowed him not only to store it, but to find it again. Because how many of you have ever had that experience of trying to sift through a whole stack of papers for that one that has the note on it? You might remember the color, maybe the texture. It's somewhere, the south half of the pile. But if you cannot find the information that you've attempted to store or take notes on, it's useless to you. It went in one ear and out the other, and you can't get it back. That's no good. So one of the critical things that he did with these slips is he found ways to effectively address them so that there was one and only one spot where the slip belonged and only one way to address the slip so he could easily find the ideas. But he did this, and this is where his systems thinking came in, I think, because he wanted to be able to connect the ideas together. He didn't want just one slip, this atomic idea, to live free floating in a vacuum. That's not how ideas work. You see, ideas want to grow, to spread, to connect to one another. And I want to demonstrate some of that to you a little later in the talk. But keep in mind that an idea on its own won't do anything. Ideas are seeds. They need to be planted in a garden. And sometimes you need multiple species of idea together to really get a good harvest. You need to connect them. In order to connect them, you have to be able to find them again. And you need to be able to have them refer to each other. In order to be able to find them again, of course, you have to store them effectively, because without that, where are your notes? And of course, in order to get any of this, you need to be able to feed the whole system by effectively capturing those ideas when they come in. Catch, store, find, connect. And here we come back to, okay, catch, store, find, connect, what? Because I'm not really talking about those little paper slips. That's not the important piece. No, I'm talking about the key product for knowledge workers, right? This is the whole crux of the talk, the knowledge, right? Knowledge workers don't produce things. I did not produce a little knick-knack that I can hand to you and say, this was my product for the day. Even in software, technically, I'm not producing a thing. I am writing a program, a set of instructions to be executed that when executed exhibit a certain behavior. but it's not a thing. It's not some physically thing I can hand to you. The only time it's useful is if I have put it out there to run somewhere for you. But what I produced was the instructions, the sequence of ideas and steps, a process, if you will. And so I want you to keep in mind that what we produce as knowledge workers are not things. Software is not a thing. It is an automated form of a process. We produce concepts, ideas, and processes. So by concepts, what do I mean? Well, authors are a good example of this, right? Say a sci-fi author. Some of the things he might be producing are this conception of the world in the future and how this magnificent new technology might work. And then probably thinking through what impacts it might have on society. Imagine, figuring out the immortality drug. What does that do when you suddenly have a stage of society that truly is immortal and can gather wealth ad infinitum, and a stage of society that can't quite get there? We explore this all the time in sci-fi, but that concept is the product of the knowledge. Ideas. These might be new product ideas. You might think, hey, Will, with 3D printing, now we can actually print layered forms of glass to create a differential refraction index that over the linear distance of the glass, the light bends. I could essentially create a light funnel. What might that be used for? By the way, this actually exists. It's for solar panels, and it increases their efficiency like 2x. An idea about what if I could apply this technology, 3D printing, with glass. And then, of course, lastly, you have process. Easiest example I can come up with. These are agile versus waterfall, the way we organize ourselves to do our work. You could also think of processes for things more along the lines of, say, DevOps. How are you going to trail information, products, through that new process? Concepts, ideas, processes. These are the key products of a knowledge worker. But they all have something relatively unusual in common. And that is you can't hold them, right? Like you cannot hold a concept. You cannot hold an idea. I don't remember the last time I ever held Agile in my hand, but I'm quite certain it was never. And if you cannot hold it, I mean, there's that whole thing of it's not a thing. But what am I supposed to do to store it? Well, there's another physical something that I think will help us kind of get a grasp on the transformation that has to happen for these intangible things. And I want to ask you the question like this. How do you ship a liquid? And I mean this literally, like throw in some answers on the chat box, but how would you go about attempting to ship a liquid? You can't hold it. It certainly isn't going to be very stable. If you do, it'll run through your fingers. Container through pipelines. Ooh, that's a thought. I hadn't heard of that one. What else have we got?
Hey, Daniel. I know one for me was there's a movie a while back where they were launching a ship into space, right?
Mhm.
There's actually an issue from the launch because the liquid was moving around.
Mhm.
So that kind of sprung that thought in my head. Brought this up.
Yeah, there's that. There's another idea there in the pipeline kind of for dealing with that, which is to freeze it. All of these are fantastic. And I want to highlight two big patterns I'm seeing there, right? One of them is let's wrap it in something, right? Either a pipe and then connect the pipes to where I want it to go, or I wrap it in something that I could then actually hand off. And then the last one, and I like that second thought you got there, which was to freeze it, is to change its form. So I'll offer the following visual on it, right? You give it a shell. In the terms of wine, you give it a bottle, and you seal that bottle so it doesn't come out. And then if you're really careful about it, you wrap something around that bottle so that you can send it through the US postal mail. Because otherwise, there's a decent chance you don't ship a bottle of wine, you ship a bunch of broken shards of glass and a rather smelly cardboard box at the end. You put the bottle in something to protect it. So keep those two things in mind. You change its form or you wrap something around it to give new value to the thing that's of value at the end, which is the wine, not the bottle. Those might be pretty for decoration, but I guarantee you no one really wants the bottle when they buy wine. They want the wine. So how do you ship a liquid? You change its form or you wrap it in something. How do you deal and manage an intangible idea, concept, or process. You change its form, you wrap it in something. And so now we naturally get to the practical part of the talk, which is how do I practice personal knowledge management? Now, this thing is all over the map because now when we get to practice, I have to start talking about tools. But I want to make certain before I depart from the core conception of personal knowledge management that I have solidly locked in an idea for you. Personal knowledge management is a set of behavioral practices of your own work. It is on you, how you think, how you manage. Its personal nature is incredibly important. These ideas are meant to highlight patterns. They're not meant to dictate this is the one true way. My recommendation then as you go through this is not to take my word as gospel, but to take my word as here were the results of my experiment and my personal research. You can dig into a vast realm of possible tools, ideas, processes, the right ways, the wrong ways, the one thing I wish I knew. When you go look in personal knowledge management, it can be very easy to get overwhelmed. Don't worry. Take it at a pace you can, because honestly, any system that you build that works for you is better than no system at all. And I guarantee you, you will gain more effectiveness as you build a system that's tailored to the way you think, just like Mr. Nicholas Luman did. And I want you to take that time. Don't regret the fact that you're just starting. You don't have to have the perfect system. It doesn't have to do all of these things well. You won't know how to do it well, one of the skills of knowledge management yet, until you practice them. Start small, build up. Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at the steps I mentioned, right? Let's go back to that thought page where there were 4 major steps: catch, store, find, connect. So step 1, catch ideas. Let me ask you a question. How do you know a good idea when you see one? Trick question. Answer is you don't. In fact, until we've developed a real good sense of what an idea's caliber is through experience and having given a bunch of bad ones in the past, we don't know the caliber of an idea when we see it. We might have a gut instinct about it, but here's my recommendation to you. Don't let them escape. They're too valuable to lose. You are literally burning product as a knowledge worker if you don't catch the ideas when they occur. Sometimes that looks like, hey, I'm just going to talk about it so that it'll get logged in my memory. Sometimes that means jotting yourself a note down. I used to have a pad of sticky notes that would just decorate my desk because they kept coming too fast. But the goal is capture them in a way you can consistently catch them so you can evaluate them later. Most recently, the form that this system has taken for me is not actually note cards or Post-it notes or even electronic notes. No, instead, I walk around with this little guy. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it in the video, but it is a digital voice recorder. I basically just have to turn it on, press the big red button, click, and it now is memorizing for me the idea I have in my head. And I did this for a very particular reason, because you see, the trick with the catch stage is to reduce friction. If it takes you 5 minutes to find a good pen, to find your notebook, to open your notebook, before you can start writing down the idea you had, you will have lost it. Straight up. The idea won't stick around that long. It's going to flow through you, and as soon as you've had to shift context to finding somewhere in my desk, oh, there's my notebook, hold on. It's gone. You cannot afford to lose the context of the idea, so reduce friction. Make it as seamless as possible to get idea out of your noggin onto the capture format. This is the step where we are actually either wrapping the idea in something to make it more useful, or we are transforming it, freezing it, as the example came in earlier, right? We need to freeze the idea in place. And I like this a lot because it takes a liquid kind of intangible to a solid. I can now move it around. This is the critical important. You need to do this in as low a friction way as possible. It needs to be easy, seamless. What is that for you? I don't know. But the ways I've found to do it were, of course, had a bunch of sticky notes around. Heck, you could do this on just pure electronic formats and just open Notepad. That's a great way to do it, provided you remember to save so the idea doesn't die if your computer turns off. But that gets us more into storage. Coming back, good ways to capture are what work for you. What is the lowest friction way for you to get the idea out of your head in a way that you can remember what it meant later? I have had to move away from written systems because my handwriting is terrible. No, really, it's that bad. I have, while trying to capture the idea, written so fast that I literally have the doctor's signature worth of a note. No one knows what I just prescribed to myself, leastwise me. That's not helpful. So I've had to shift because for me, the lowest friction way to deal with catching a note is to talk about it. And for those of you who've worked with me, you know I like to talk my way through some of these ideas, and that sometimes I'll end up arguing myself back around. But it's the discussion for me that exercises that muscle of where'd the idea come from, what does it mean, and can it be, oh, hey, here we go. And so that's why I've optimized and ended up investing in my system. It was only about $20 to make it easy. Now, of course, being here, they're stored, kind of, but they're not in the final form that I need them, right? Because remember, there are 4 steps: capture, store, find, and connect. And the real value in personal knowledge management comes from those latter 2 steps, but has to be enabled by the catch and store segment. So even though I've got them stored, this is not the final place they need to be. But let's talk about storage here for a minute, right? Because storage is wide open. But what you store and how you store it depends upon how you harden the idea. Did you capture it by wrapping a bottle around it? Well, then you probably need a bottle rack. Did you harden it by catching it on a note card? Okay, well, then maybe the slip box is a good thing for you. But for me, where I really started this storage thing, and honestly where I started my capture, was an engineering notebook. I started with a booklet with a pen always attached to the booklet so that I could keep the friction down as the place where I would store everything. If I was working on a bit of code, the notebook would have my thoughts on the design. If I was in the middle of thinking of this and I thought of a neat little story gags like, hey, you know, in that movie last night, that kind of applies to this work situation, write that down. And of course, that ends up with a disorganized mess. And it's a pain because now I have to remember what days a given page goes to. But it was stupidly easy to get started. Like those notebooks cost maybe $20, pen costs 50 cents, maybe. But you can bring that paper with you everywhere. Every meeting you're in, they're not going to argue with you bringing in a notebook. Mind you, you can't read it in the shower, so that does make shower thoughts a little harder to catch. But hey, technically the same thing with the digital audio recorder. Can't really bring that in the shower either. So you don't have to have a perfect storage system. You just need one that works. And building on that concept, just get started. It's work, right? You're gonna have to find the system that fits for the lifestyle you have right now. And the system that works for you today won't work for you 6 months from now. That's okay. It should grow and evolve with you. The benefits for the engineering notebook are it's direct and fast to start up. It's limited though, because you only have probably about 1/4's worth of note paper there, depending on how many notes you take. It is unstructured, which means that usually driving information into it's really easy. But that ease of use and lack of structure means that it's all on you. What structure do you need in order to be able to follow up on the steps 3 and 4 of find and connect? That's where things get a little harder. So, well, let's see if we can do something that's a little more durable, something that has no real limit, right? Because after all, if I had ideas from last quarter and I just switched to my new engineering notebook last week, I don't have those ideas from a week ago anymore because I'm not bringing that notebook around. Nah, nuts. So what could I do? Well, another option would be to literally just have a bunch of text files running around on your computer. Just create a folder on your desktop, my knowledge base. And honestly, this is a decent way to get started. And in fact, there are a bunch of programs that I used to use back in the early 2000s that did something more or less like this, where you would just have a note system, because I didn't want to go buy Evernote at the time. And you just say, hey, create a new note. Oh, that needs to go into this folder. Okay. Problem with those systems is that, of course, you need a computer. If your computer's not on, you can't capture the notes. And the whole problem with the shower ideas again. Again, it's unstructured, so it's free and flexible to do what you want with it, which is great because it's easy to start, but it's really hard to use over time, especially as your note mass grows and grows and grows, because if you don't have process around it to get that information from it's everywhere to here's the condensed super nutritional format, it can be not as helpful. And so this is where the smart form, going from simple to electronic to now smart storage mechanisms come in. My personal recommendation right now is obsidian.md. It is essentially a fancy markdown text editor. And it allows you to connect your notes through some nice little facilities that it's got, but it still operates more or less as a bunch of text notes. It just provides a nice UI layer to make it easy to interact with for steps 3 and 4. Now, there's no other tools that do this. Evernote's another great example. Easy to get started. It's basically you fire up a note, drop some text in it, and off you go. Notion is another example, but all of these I don't recommend to start with until you know what you're trying to do. Because it might be that Notion's workflow maps better to how you think information should be interacting with. It happened to be for me that I wanted the level of control that Obsidian gave me, and it gave me the level of control to build my system into it rather than to have its system imposed on me. Now, these still require a computer or bare minimum like your cell phone, and maybe some cloud syncing thing so that your cell phone can get the information off your desktop. But they're incredibly useful. They end up being semi-structured because they have an opinion about how your data should be stored. This can be useful, especially as a beginner if you don't know and want to have them hand you a format. That can be okay. Just be more careful of vendor lock-in, right? They're easier to use than the bunch of text files because you don't have to manage them all yourself anymore. But they come in with other things because of that semi-structured nature and, of course, possible subscription fees. So my recommendation still comes down to keep it simple. Don't depend on the computer for your first version of a knowledge base. Start with notebooks. And don't worry about getting your notebook organized perfectly either. Start with the ability to capture them consistently. Then learn systems like maybe bullet journaling that has you create an index at the front of your notebook where you can label where certain pages and certain topics went. So that if you had a sudden flash of insight on this topic, create a page for it. Here's the topic. Here's my page number, and go add it to your index so you can easily find them. But learn systems that are driven by you first, because that'll exercise the skills here to more effectively manage your knowledge over time. Now, I want to take a moment here to breathe. Let's see, any other questions? Nope, not yet. Let's move right along. Step 3. And this boils down to the answer to the following question. How do you find an old note? Legitimately, you've got a bunch of these old notes, pretending you've already got that system. What ways have you thought of for finding information you wanted to find again? See if we got anything coming in the chat here.
Nothing in the chat yet. I do encourage our attendees, if they have something to share, feel free. For me, maybe this can kick it off a little bit. I put a lot of my main notes, like my initial notes go in Notepad, just like you suggested. But once I kind of go back and review them and I want to organize them, I actually put them in Google Drive. I'm a software engineer, right? So I have a lot of documentation and step guides and stuff like that. So I try to organize them there. That works really well for me.
Yeah. And that's actually another example we're seeing here coming with like, well, drop it in Google Drive or Keep and then just search. A free text search. That's definitely a way to do it. What if I wanted to find all of my notes on a topic? Obviously, the free text search might be a great way to do it, especially if the topic has a very common way of phrasing it. But if I wanted to say all of these things are related to Agile, my thoughts on Agile training, my thoughts on Agile team, there you go, you get tagging, right? And this is where the find thing really comes into play. It's about making those notes discoverable and referenceable so that you can enable the connections. Because if you notice the way I constructed that question, how would I find all of my thoughts on? I'm talking about a pattern, not necessarily about a distinct note or even a distinct topic, but about a pattern. Now, thinking in terms of, okay, let's start with the paper notebook again. One of the most common ways I've found for find this information again is, oh, hold on, there we go, dog-ear the page. Hey, there was information on this page you need to know about. Problem with the dog-earing system is it's indistinguishable. It is discoverable in that I could happen upon the information again by going through my dog ears. But how do I know which highlight on the page I was referring to when I decided to dog ear the page? I don't. It's just kind of there as though we're in this giant stack of papers, which ain't great, but still having separate stacks, separate notebooks is also a valid way to do it. in terms of the electronic system, separate folders. In Evernote, it literally has separate notebooks or notebook stacks as the concept for higher level organization of information. But really the power is in that tagging system. But the trick there is, of course, you still need to manage it yourself. If you cannot get to a note again, it's worthless, or less than worthless, actually, because it's burning disk space and possibly mental load without adding value to you. You need to be able to find it again, and it has to be referenceable within a category or within a concept of things. And so now we start talking about what is effectively metadata. And here it becomes prudent to highlight how Nicholas Luman did this with his notes. You see, what he developed was effectively an addressing scheme. He had an addressing scheme where the first note of all of his was labeled 001. Okay, and then that held a single idea, or enough content about the idea to convey what he was thinking about it. And suppose he starts adding develops, and then you have 002, 003, all the way out through 101. Great. But he realizes that in writing note 101, that what he's really doing is modifying his thought or extending his thought on thought 001. And so he'd add a new slip, 001A. Notice he switched there from numerical to alphanumeric. But the place for 001A just sits right behind 001. So anytime he wants to take out his entire thought work on the concept represented by 001, he takes everything starting with 001, because that entire set of information is now related to that concept. And of course, as you go through and you modify 001A, maybe you have a 001B, and you think, oh, wait, no, I need to go modify something again. 001A, 01. And toggle back and forth, back and forth. And he created a system that could be layered on top of each other so that it could expand in the future while maintaining the ability for him to always find all of the content that was relevant. But that only works if, it's like all of these are related by the same core content 001. What if I wanted to reference something about Agile over here in team building, which might be, topic 10? I can't put topic 10 next to topic 1. That doesn't work. That breaks the system. So the way he would do it is he would use this address that he assembled. Hey, when you're thinking about team building in the Agile context, be sure to look at note 001B02, which would be the second modifying note behind 001B. So long as he could find and quickly reference it, now he's had the ability to start connecting these ideas by the ability to find them. In Obsidian, you can get a similar aspect because you can have a note, say, on retrospectives, and then just say, hey, addressing Agile here is founded on some core concepts, and build on that, so that I can now make the statement that the note on retrospectives is associated with the note on Agile. This finding of information, how do I navigate my system, depends a lot on you. If you're in an engineering notebook, my personal recommendation is you build an index for yourself. Find a way to say that there is this idea, and this idea exists on this page, so that I can start at the beginning of the notebook every time and see what all's in here, and quickly reference and jump to the topic that I'm interested in. I don't have to thumb through the whole thing. In short, to impose a degree of organization on your information so that you can create value from it. Because now that you've captured it, now that you've gotten a separate place not in your head, now you can kind of look at it askew and say, well, it'd be a lot easier if inspect, adapt. Because after all, knowledge isn't useful if all it does is collect. You need to be able to do something with it. And that then brings us to step 4, which is how we start driving the value out of ideas. And I made this statement back at the beginning. It's one of my theses. Putting ideas in contact with each other tends to create more ideas and allow you to generate value from them. Because it's connecting those ideas together that makes for new products, makes for new opportunities. Consider, there's this wonderful little toy that I like to use as an example. And it's called Skylanders. In case you hadn't heard of it, it released before COVID. And it basically was composed of a game with an RFID reader that you'd have this molded plastic of some video game character, and you bing, scan it, and ta-da, they're there in the game. Kids loved it. And all it really was a modification of some stuff we already knew how to do. RFID reader, RFID kit, tag, and injected molded plastic. Stupidly easy. These These toys didn't even move. They're figurines. They found out a way to turn a video game into interacting with physical reality in a predictable way that the kids attached to, because now buying that figurine gave them powers in the video game. Suddenly you've got this wonderful little virtuous cycle. Let me show you another example of how this works. Look at the example images here, right? On the left, I've got an envelope, right? And what do you think envelope almost everyone thinks? Mail. Perfect. That's exactly what that looks like to me too. Next to it, I've got a lock. Normally with locks, we think security or like, password. But if I smash those two together, the symbol on the right takes on new meaning. When I've asked people what did they think that means in the past, they'll tell me, oh, that's an encrypted email. Yeah, that's exactly what I'd think of it too. It's some implicit security or additional layer of security on a message. And all I did was I took I took sets of pixels and I smashed them together and I created and conveyed a new idea to you. This is the value in putting ideas in contact with each other. Remember when I told you that ideas are seeds? They need to be gardened and cultivated, and oftentimes you need supporting species of ideas together. This is what I mean. If we want to deliver business value, is it more valuable to the business for just it to be an email service, or do they need to consider security? Do I need to know about the authentication of the user or the authorization of the user? And how does that concept map to this thing we're talking about in marketing of a digital twin? Speaking of that, let's talk data governance here real quick, because I have to be careful with how much of a digital twin I create, because I might have to deal with GDPR. Oh, and I just traveled from a messaging functionality in a system all the way over to rules, regulation, and governance compliance through about 3 steps of idea. This web or connection is one of the most powerful aspects that Nicholas Luman was able to build into his ideas. Now, again, playing on my favorite tool, one of the big selling points of Obsidian is that if you can create your notes and you can link them by the reference of, hey, here's the topic, literal name of the note, now you can create a web. How does this information play together? And I can see all of my notes just with a click, all of my notes on productivity, or all of my notes that relate to or reference productivity. I could even pull in specific elements of my productivity note into those to build larger content. I can weave in my ideas together. Or, and critically, by connecting my ideas like this, when someone comes to me for coaching and asks, hey, I need to get more productive, what should I do? I now have an information system that I can quickly reference and grab my entire conception of productivity and talk them through it. Now, all of that's trying to directly use the information. What about being a software engineer? Hey, I'm supposed to be managing this stuff. Okay, well, what design did you use? A design is not a tangible. In fact, it's even less tangible than the software. It's an idea, a concept. Tell me the reasons why you used it. Okay. Now, you've got 2 pieces there. You've got a business context, concept, and a design. What happens the next time you run into that business concept? Well, you might be searching through your notes. Hey, what was the last time I had to deal with regulated billing? Oh, hey, that appeared in this note about a design. Let me go look that up. Oh, okay. And then maybe you can go further and say, hey, in this design, we ran into these problems. And now you've connected 3 streams of information, 3 separate, disparate ideas that used to be just linked in your memory. And now you can navigate them and quickly help the next company you help or the next team you help. Hey, guys, hold on. We tried this design last time. Here were the problems we ran into and why we ran into them. Here's what I would recommend this time. And you can start working the knowledge, because honestly, do you need to have an actual implementation to create designs? No. You need to have an idea of what technology is available, about what problems are being attempting to be solved. But your ideas can be generated in absence, or at least in advance of the need to implement them. And it's often something I would recommend. Spend time thinking on what you're doing, on why you're doing it, even at the junior level. Talking about the object-oriented programming practices, on the design patterns that you're being encouraged to use, or even on the development practices like TDD. All of those represent a concept or a process that you can capture your thoughts on. And as you learn, go talk to them. This system of personal knowledge management has knock-on impacts to everything you could possibly do. And it still comes down to personal process, right? Nicholas Luman changed the world with note cards. He changed the world through the changes he made in sociology. He showed us an entirely new pattern, which I have been sharing and presenting with you today, of how to go from I'm taking notes furiously on my notepad and then forgetting them, to turning it into a system, to a tool that you have built and created value through, that is specifically tailored to you. In the world of generic processes and optional handles, you've created one that is custom built and fits like a glove. You could change the world with how you're working on this one. Remember, it all starts with managing your knowledge. You need to catch your ideas. You don't want them to escape. Every one of them has the potential to grow into a valuable fruit that you would want to offer to the rest of the world. But you need to store them. You need to make them concrete in a way that they can move and adjust and be reorganized, or just so you can find them, and easily, because no one wants to have to spend an hour searching for the answer online, much less searching through their own notes to find the reference to this thing from 2 years ago. But more importantly, is that in finding them, you want to be able to leverage that finding mechanism to connect them, so that you can connect your true and evaluated experiences from here was the business context where this design appeared, here was the design we used to solve it, here were the things we encountered with that design, and the technologies we tried to use to undergird it. This technology changed. Oh, maybe the design could change. Being able to connect your observations, your ideas together makes them more valuable, makes you as a knowledge worker more valuable. But all of that comes down to how effective are you in your habits and your practices of managing the knowledge that you are working on a daily basis. Can you take it out of your head? Can you catch it? Can you wrap it in a bottle? Can you freeze it so that you could store it in some place and maybe share it with others in a way that they can consume on their own time? Can you quickly find those references so that you can put them to use without having to interfere with catching another idea? Can you find it so you could share it? Can you find it so that when it comes to a context you're familiar with, you can connect the ideas together to make new ones, to inform better decisions, to empower new, more effective designs, or to help avoid the bad ones? Because no one wants to go relive a bad moment in their life. Knowledge management can help in those, all of them, but it starts with practice. So I want to leave today, having challenged you, you need to capture your ideas. You need to store them in a way so that you can easily find them again, but most importantly, so that you may connect the ideas you already have to a new and novel use case to make the knowledge you have gathered and gained and cultivated more and more useful. So what will you do with your knowledge? Of course, we have some time here at the end, and I want to offer again for any questions, for prompts on specific things to go try. Talk with me. My goal here in this talk has been to gain value, add value to you through your new improved practice of personal knowledge management.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. That was a really informative talk. We have no more questions or comments coming in, but we do have some time left, so I encourage our attendants to post anything if they have any. But I know I need to revamp my note-taking strategy. I know personally, at least, I have a hard time, with step 2 and 3, just revisiting the notes. You can put anything down on paper, but
Yep.
it doesn't help if you don't revisit them and you don't observe them, and you don't organize them. Otherwise, it's just a thought that goes onto paper.
Exactly. So one of the things I'll offer is a potentially easy way to get that started. Are you taking free notes just freehand in a notebook?
It kind of depends where I am, actually. So I do carry a notebook with me, and if I'm at a talk, like like today, for
Mhm.
example, if this was in person, it would have been on my notebook.
Yeah.
But I actually was just taking notes right in my notepad app.
Okay. So here's then what I'd recommend. Build a structure around it. If you guys haven't read Atomic Habits, strongly recommend it as a reference material for times like these. But build a habit based on a timing that allows you to just naturally, oh, right, I should do that. For me, it used to start at, oh, hey, it's New Year's. Now's a good time to go look at what I did this year. And so my notes were organized by year. Not the greatest way, but you can manage it. Eventually that turned into, hey, this notebook is now done. I would go back through it and I would check, is this information still relevant? Because a lot of it would be like notes I took on a meeting for a topic that's now done. I finished. Okay, cool. Strike it out. But for the knowledge that was still useful, that one I would make certain I had some kind of index on, or like flag with like one of those little Post-it thingies or stickies that would give it a color. So I could say, hey, anytime I'm looking for this, here you go. And I recommend you build that up on the natural basis of, I finished the notebook, as a really great way to just build in a natural moment for you to go back and review your data. Taking it that next step really depends upon what you want to do with it. Do you want to learn how to access it? Do you want to reference it? Do you want to start compiling larger notebooks of common thoughts? That's a way to do it. I personally preferred at that moment to go from physical into electronic for the larger reference information. And eventually had to teach myself new systems from the, this is just a note I need to capture, a fleeting idea, to I've given this idea some real thought. And so now it's gone from fleeting idea to a real thought. Or I've given this thought and I have now turned it into something, say a talk or a blog post or a design. And now I want to capture and reference that in the future. I had to teach myself and how to develop a system and even a language to describe these things, fleeting, thought, permanent, to be able to build the system on it. And for that, well, comes down to how are you adding new information to your system? Obviously, thank you, Jordan, for attending this talk, and thank you all who are still online for that. But building the systems to pull your inputs, what's your cycle on those? Build the meta cycle on the individual of do it so that you can review over time what's gone on. I like to do this on typical calendar moments, end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year, because they're easy to recognize when the event occurs, and I can just put a reminder on my calendar. Hey, review your stuff. That helpful, Jordan?
That was really helpful, Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah.
I know there's certain times where I do get more organized and I do have better strategies. And I know what if I ever need to reference those notes, I know exactly where they are. I know a good portion of what's in them, and it can be really helpful, right? So it's just doing that more consistently, I think, as well, and refining that strategy as you kind of go over it again.
Excellent.
Great. Yeah, well, since we have no more comments or questions, Daniel, do you have any closing statements?
Last closing statement would be, thank you guys for joining us for personal knowledge management. I hope you've now learned to leverage the force multiplier, wherein it comes down to how you personally want to manage your knowledge, your concepts, ideas, processes that you're using on the daily basis, and the practice you have of managing them so you can catch, store, find, and then connect them again later. Because any knowledge we can't reference again later, we can't share with others, doesn't produce value. So thank you for attending this talk. I hope that you find it able to more effectively propel you into the future.
Great. Again, thank you all for attending today's Improving Virtual Lunch and Learn. And Daniel Scheifler, thank you so much for sharing your insight. This was very incredible.
Of course, happy to, sir.
Yes. For everyone else on the call, the recording of the session will be available the next business day from our virtual events page at improving.com/virtual-events. And now I posted that link in the chat because it can be a little hard to type it in as I'm speaking. But we at Improving hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and stay in tune. We have lunch and learns every Friday, so join us next week. Thank you, everyone.
Y'all have a good weekend.